The first ray of sunlight entered the room through the loosely closed apartment and touched Camille's cheek to Chikatilo's nose. She stretched funny, even in her sleep, and sneezed. Opened her eyes and yawned sweetly. Then patted her palm, and Christopher was no longer beside her. He was gone again. At the crack of dawn. Didn't even wake him up. Christopher's been working a lot lately. He is, again in the office. They are preparing large projects. He almost disappears there 24 hours a day. He comes to sleep late and then goes back to his favorite job. Camille pulled on her robe and went into the kitchen. She had prepared her husband's breakfast from the evening, but the stuffed pancakes remained untouched. Again, he only drank coffee. Gone, burned, sighed Camille. Totally earned himself a young one. In general, she tried to get up in the morning and walk her husband to work, but this morning she overslept a little. Apparently, he didn't want to wake her up. A good thing she made breakfast the night before. What for? He didn't even taste it. Oh well, Emily's gonna make him eat breakfast. Camille looked into the nursery. 10-year-old Emily was asleep, snuggled up to her teddy bear. The woman smiled. How sweetly her daughter sleeps. It's a shame to wake her up. Let her sleep a little longer. Camille returned to the kitchen, put the pancakes in the microwave, poured milk into a plate, and turned on the gas. She thought for a second, how many years has it been? Her mornings start the same way with her husband rushing off to work. She collects her daughter before to kindergarten, now to school. And the kitchen. Yes, she's a housewife now. But 12 years ago, everything was different, and she saw a different future. The milk in the pot sang, and the puffy hat, and rushed upwards. Camille came to her senses, even shaking her head. Enough of these memories. Time to make cocoa. A few minutes later, the chocolate aroma wafted through the kitchen. The pancakes would have caught fire long ago. Breakfast was ready. Camille looked anxiously at the clock. It was already 8:30. It was time to wake Emily. Daughter, get up. She looked into the nursery. Breakfast was on the table. Sleep, mumbled Emily, clutching the toy tighter to her. 5 more minutes. 1 minute, Camille replied firmly. Come on, open your eyes and the bathroom. Her daughter sighed heavily and then sat up on the bed. Mommy, I had such a dream, she said, yawning as if we had moved to the country. We have such a huge and beautiful dacha. It's like a palace. I was walking there. I don't remember anything else. Did you wake me? Well, I'm sorry, my dear, Camille smiled. Next time, be sure to watch. Aha, yes, watch with you about the man. And let's go. I fell barefoot in the bathroom. You've got classes in school. That's the way it is. There's no time to live, neither in your dreams nor in reality. Your slippers are in the bathroom, Camille laughed back. An hour later, she saw her daughter off to school, and she kissed her daughter goodbye. Camille decided to take a walk around the city with her camera. Today she was going to the park. It was spring, just the time when all living things remember that it was time to bloom. The good to leave, to please the world with rich colors. And the apple trees in the park were dazzlingly beautiful. In its snow-white garb, the lilac attracted the eye. One could not take one's eyes off its floral outfit. Camille enjoyed photographing both nature and people. How she loved it. At some point, she decided to take a break and enjoy the surroundings. She sat down on a bench and closed her eyes. Somewhere nearby in the bushes of the bay are birds. Auntie, are you a photographer? She heard a small voice. Camille opened her eyes in surprise and saw a boy of about 5 years old next to the girl. No, baby, I'm just taking pictures, she answered. Why? The boy raised his eyebrows in surprise. Where do you want these pictures? Just for fun. The child nodded understandingly. What a sweet little boy, Camille thought to herself. Let me take a picture of you, she suggested. Who are you here with? I'm alone, answered the boy. What do you mean alone? Why? Where's your mom? Mom is in heaven and Dad is working. I'm with my grandmother now. She took me to the store to get bread, and you're walking alone. What's the big deal? The boy shrugged. Oh, I'm hanging out with you. He waved his arms funny and ran to the grocery store that was nearby. Camille followed him with a glance. How pathetic. Such a little boy, already motherless and independent. Camille shook her head, but it's not good for him to run around alone. He'll walk back. She'll see him off. And suddenly, she wanted to do something to help this strange child. Looking at the door of the store, Camille took a few more pictures. Soon, a boy came out of the store with a loaf and literally jumped up and down on the path. His wavy blonde hair, a slightly warm breeze. He was smiling so carefree, jumping over, holding the loaf, that Camille couldn't resist and took a picture of him. What a great shot! Uncle, did you take my picture? Asked the boy, running up to Camille. Yep, she nodded and showed him the picture on the display. Do you like it? It's fine. A little reserved. He nodded and looked timidly at Camille. Can you make me a card? I can. Camille smiled. Next time we meet, I'll give you a picture. Now let me walk you home. Is your name Camille? My name is Stephen. He smiled back. I live over there. And he pointed with his pen to an old 5-story building, the roof of which looked away from the park. And I'm in that house over there. Camille pointed to their new building. Do you live in your house? Appreciated Stephen. I haven't seen you around here before. My dad and I just moved in with my grandmother. He's at work all the time now, and I'm with my grandmother at the daycare center. So, chatting, they reached the 5-story building. Camille promised that in a couple of days, she would take that walk again and give the boy a picture. He promised to be there. Returning home, Camille thought how unfair life can be. Here is a good, wonderful boy, and apparently, he has a hard life. No, Mom. Dad's always at work. Huh? Grandma must be sick. She remembered her own story. Camille grew up with her grandmother, too. Her parents died in an accident. Jenna did everything she could to make sure her granddaughter grew up to be a decent person. She insisted that Camilla go to art school after high school. She was so good at drawing. But after graduating from the school, Camilla was seriously into photography rather than portraits and still lifes. Soon her work was noticed in a fashion magazine, and she was invited to work. So she became a photojournalist. One day she was assigned to photograph a young, successful businessman. After a successful series of photos, the businessman suddenly invited her on a romantic date, and Camille did not refuse. Thus began her romance with Christopher. The girl was over the moon, rich and handsome, and so caring. In general, when Christopher made her an offer, Camille did not doubt for a second. Of course, she will be his wife. Except Jenna didn't appreciate her granddaughter's enthusiasm. Oh, Camilla, he's a slippery Christopher, the old lady remarked. Maybe you shouldn't be in a hurry to make friends with her just yet. Jenna laughed further. Christopher is not slippery. He's the best in the world. Oh, I don't know. Jenna sighed. A week before the wedding, Jenna left the world. Camille was very worried. She wanted to cancel the wedding, but Christopher insisted on having it. The guests were invited. The restaurant was paid for. I felt sorry for Jenna, of course, but she was in her 70s. Age, and even listened to her husband-to-be, and then constantly listened to him. At first, Christopher insisted that Camille stop talking to her girlfriends. We got more. In principle, it was not difficult. They only socialized once a year anyway. And then her husband demanded that Camille quit her job. She didn't want to quit, but she was already 3 months pregnant, so she didn't think for a long time. Yes, she'll be busy with the house and her husband, and when Emily came along, she forgot all about work. And all these years, Camille's life has been narrowed down to the size of a nice duplex apartment with excellent renovation and good furniture. What else does she want? Yup. She's got the baby, the husband, the wealth. Yes, Christopher made good money at the trading firm where he was CEO. But as the years went by, Camille said it. She wanted to break out of her golden cage. No, not for good, but at least for a few hours. She even dreamed of returning to magazines. But Christopher, when he learned of her aspiration, objected. "My wife will stay at home," he declared. "Why should you be born? Don't you have enough money?" "Yes." "Weak?" Camille was indignant. "But I want to realize my profession. All I have is cooking, cleaning, and shopping." "What about it, Emily? If you go to work, the child will be on his own all day." "Camille, that's the height of folly. A woman is first and foremost a mother, a wife." "No, I'm against your work. I even realized that my husband couldn't be persuaded, so I decided to forget about my dreams. Except that sometimes I went out with a camera, for the soul. Like the time I met the funny Stephen, sensible beyond his years." 2 days later, as promised, she was in the park with pictures of the boy. It didn't take long for him to show up. He showed up, also on a hop, mouth up to his ears. "Aunt Camille, are you here?" she shouted joyfully as he came running up. "Of course I'm here, I promised." And Camille handed him the pictures. "Oh, how nice!" The boy admired them. "Aunt Camille, are you a professional?" "Professional?" Camille smiled, sadly. "Are you going to the store again today?" "No, I'm going to the drugstore," sighed the boy. "Grandma's sick. I have to buy medicine and they'll sell it to you." "I don't know." The boy hesitated and looked hesitantly at Camille. "Let me help you," she guessed. "What kind of medicine do you need?" The boy timidly held out a list of medicines and money. "Put that away." Camille pointed to the money. "But how can these medicines cost a penny?" Camille reassured him. Of course, it wasn't exactly like that, but she wanted to support the boy. It was clear that he lived with his grandmother and father very simply, if not poorly. The boy was dressed in old clothes, though clean. From the drugstore, she walked him home again. The next day, as Camille was returning home with Emily, she was met in the park by Stephen and a tall, scowling man. He was in his mid-40s, tired, whiskered, slightly silver-haired. It was clear that life had not spared him. "Daddy!" Stephen shrieked when he saw Camille. "That aunt!" And the boy was about to rush towards her, but the man held him back, grabbed his arm. "Are you the one who took my son's picture and bought his mother's medicine?" Deeply he asked. "Yes," I was confused. "Let me ask you, why do you want my child? You have a daughter, I see. We just became friends with your son, and I wanted to do him a favor." "I'll ask you not to do anything like that again." The man muttered and walked away, holding his head by the hand. He looked back, glancing guiltily at Camille. It was clear he was about to pay up, but she couldn't even catch up with him and calm him down. Oh. The man was so disgruntled. Really, why would she want this boy? His father is right. She's a stranger to him. Mom, who is this?" Emily was surprised. "Just a boy." Sighing, Camille replied, "Let's go home. I made such a pie there today. Your favorite with berries." And already at home, seeing with what pleasure her daughter was taking another piece of pie, Camille finally calmed down. "That's it. We must forget this story. Indeed, don't do people any good." But Camille was afraid to admit to herself why she was suddenly drawn to this boy, this blonde Stephen. He reminded her of herself, but there was something else. 5 years ago, she'd lost a child in childbirth. It was her and Christopher's son. second pregnancy, and everything seemed fine. But something went wrong in the hospital. The baby was born very weak. The doctors said it was the result of birth trauma. If he survived, he'd be mentally retarded. They offered to write a waiver. Camille was against it, of course. Christopher, on the other hand, convinced her otherwise. Camille, will torture him, let's refuse, and then we'll have a normal child. And this one is not a survivor anyway. Hearing these words, Camille became hysterical. They barely calmed her down, and the next morning they told her that the baby had not survived. Camille collapsed from worry. Childbirth is stressful. She was in the hospital for another month. Never saw the baby. Christopher buried John, as Camille called him. Camille went to his grave every year. God never sent her and Christopher any more children. There was only Emily, yes. When Camille saw Stephen, she reached out to him as if he were her son. In the evening, she told her husband about the boy and his father. Christopher listened, frowning. I've never understood your desire to be for everyone. Kind. What do you need that kid for? You've got a daughter at home and you're out in the parks, he muttered. Christopher, I go to the parks, as you put it, because my soul is still asking. My hands reach for the camera. I'd rather they reached for the vacuum cleaner or the oven. Are you saying that I'm a bad hostess? Camille was indignant. I'm not saying anything like that. It's just that you belong at home. And you're like a girl, running around with a camera in the bushes. Christopher, I just wanted to share this with you. You're welcome. There was a guy, a little bit of a snafu. A little snafu. They had a big fight that night. Camille was yelling about how Christopher had lost his nerve. He doesn't see her as a person, only as a housewife. Christopher didn't go out of his way to answer for her either. If you married a serious man, you shouldn't hang around town. In the end, Christopher left, slamming the door. Emily, who had heard everything, finally looked out of the room and walked over to her mother and hugged her. Camille wiped away the occasional tear. Mommy, don't cry, whispered her daughter. I have you the best and I take the best pictures. By the way, our class teacher said that we need a photographer for the graduation, but you can't do it. Yes, of course, smiled Camille, pulling herself together. Olga Andreevna has already called me. You'll have a great photo shoot. Emily was finishing 4th grade. Camille thought about the fact that John would be going to school in a couple of years. Her heart ached again. She'd fix the wound. She was already asleep when Christopher returned. Her daughter, too. He looked in the bedroom, the nursery, and then headed quietly into the living room. Picked up his cell phone. Khalid someone talked about something. Afterward, he sat by the open window, smoking. He was thinking about something serious. Something was tormenting him. In the morning, Christopher left early as usual. Camille came home after seeing her daughter off to school, and then in the living room, she saw the phone on the couch. Christopher had forgotten. How could he be without his phone? Camille decided to take it to his office. On the way, she couldn't resist doing a little snooping through her messages. Nothing interesting in her husband's contacts. It couldn't have been otherwise. Camille knew that Christopher loved her. And then she read one strange message. Tomorrow I'll meet you at the Tower Cafe at 10 p.m. The message came at night. The number's unknown. Who made the appointment for Christopher's work?
Doesn't look like it. It's too late. Camille decided that Christopher would tell her himself. When Christopher's secretary saw Camille, she smiled. She offered her tea. He's got representatives from our competitors
Right now, she whispered, looking for common ground, so to speak. All right, I'll wait, Camille nodded. It took about an hour. At first, there was silence in the office. Then raised tones were heard. In general, a diplomatic conversation did not work. The competitors left, slamming the door to the door. Camille entered the office, seeing her husband irritated and withdrawn. "What are you doing here?" He raised his eyebrows in surprise. "You forgot your phone," Camille said softly. "I figured you'd need it during the day." "Yes, everything is upside down today." "I really hadn't even noticed that I'd left my phone at home." "Are you going to be home early tonight?" "I wanted to make something special." "No, I'm sorry. I have a lot of things to do, but you're not going to stay up all night doing them." Christopher didn't say anything. He just lowered his eyes and shook his head. Her heart even began to wonder if her husband was cheating on her. She kept thinking about that text message. And then Camille had a puzzle in her head. Her husband coming home late had become the norm. He leaves early. He's a little edgy, like he's hiding something from her, huh? That's right. He has a mistress. Camille decided to follow her husband. That evening, she went to the same cafe that was mentioned in the text message. She found a table farther away from the entrance. There was a huge aquarium, which closed Camille from prying eyes, and she herself had a good view. Very comfortable, Camille waited. Somehow she immediately realized that she was the one who had entered the cafe.
The tall, slender brunette looked around disdainfully and sat down at a table by the window. Soon, Christopher walked in as well. Yes, he headed towards this brunette. Camille looked at them, and she wanted to jump up,
Run up to them, slap her husband in the face, claw at the hair of this insolent girl. But she held back. Christopher smiled at the brunette and sat down next to her. What they were talking about, Camille couldn't hear. All she could see was Christopher's back and the sweet, luscious smile on the girl's face. Camille's heart was pounding harder and harder. Tears came to her eyes. I wondered what he would say to her if she approached them now, but then Camille felt that her legs felt like cotton. She had no strength to get up. So she decided to call him. It rang, but Christopher dropped the call. So engrossed in his conversation with the brunette, but Camille dialed again. "Yes, darling, did you want something?" he asked, a little irritated. "Hello, Christopher," Camille said as quietly as possible. "Where are you now?" "Camille, I'm in a meeting. I'm not comfortable talking." "That's it. I'll be late." And he disconnected the phone. Camille kept holding the phone to his ear. It's going to be late. In a meeting? What kind of liar is he? She cried. For how many years Camille had been sure that Christopher loved her. They'd been through so much together, and now he was doing this to her. For what? For giving him the best years of her life. For spending all day doing chores around the house without hiring an au pair. I mean, with their money, they could have. But Christopher won't. For giving up her dream and quitting her job at the magazine. Camille thought about what to do, but then the brunette stood up and headed for the exit. Christopher followed her out as well. Camille watched through the window as her husband opened the car door in front of the girl as she smiled at him. He says something back to her, also smiling. "Traitor," Camille whispered, wiping the tears from her face with exasperation. "You'll regret this." A thirst for vengeance gripped her heart. She did not know yet, but she was sure she would answer to her husband for his offense. To make a mere scandal. What, in fact, had she seen? Just her husband sitting with another woman in a cafe. He'll obviously be able to justify himself. He'll say it was a business meeting. And it doesn't matter that it was 11 at night. And it's not true that they were smiling at each other. Yes, he could tell a believable lie. Camille had no doubt about that now. A storm was brewing in her soul, so while she was making his soups and ironing his shirts, he was having fun with different girls. He tells her to stay at home to make herself comfortable. Camille decides to catch him red-handed and then throw all the accusations in his face. She ran out of the cafe and hitched a ride. There, Zato's blue Audi. She commanded the driver of an old Jiguli. Audi. Okay, Audi, nodded the older man. Are we following someone or catching up? Probably following. Husband. The driver shook his head and smoothly moved into the right lane. Surprisingly, the old car went easily and confidently, and Christopher's car flashed ahead. Camille couldn't understand where her husband was going. There were no hotels in this country. Was he going to that girl's house? Did he have a nerve? Soon, Christopher's car turned down an alley and stopped in front of the maternity hospital. Camille's heart sank. This was where she'd given birth to her John. The girl got out of his car, waved at Christopher, and ran easily up the steps of the building. So she works here, mumbled, and then let's get out of here. Only, please, you can take the roundabout way so you can be home before your husband. The old driver, understandably his, nodded in response, even had already changed into her home clothes when the door lock clicked in the hallway, as if nothing had happened. Christopher walked into the house. Hello, Robert, he smiled. I'm so tired today. It's been a long day. Are you going to feed me? Whatever you find in the refrigerator, you can eat. Camille answered indifferently and went to her daughter's room. She decided to sleep with her. Christopher was too tired to look at her. Christopher gave her a surprised look, but did not say a word. In the morning, Camille lay down and waited for him to go to work. Then she got up and woke her daughter. Get up, sleepy one, she said with a smile. 1 week of school left, smiling accurately, stretched Emily. How great Daddy's vacation is going to be. Where are we going this year? Dad's not talking. I don't want to go to the sea. Maybe to the mountains. Maybe to the mountains. Camille answered absent-mindedly. Now let's get ready for school. We have to find out everything about the photo shoot today. You have graduation on Friday. Afterwards, there was a lot of fuss over her daughter's party. Christopher was still working into the night. Camille was quiet. She thought about the situation, decided not to get too excited. But seeing Christopher was hard for her, especially to imagine him with another. Of course, Christopher didn't make it to the graduation of the fourth graders, citing his workload. Emily put on a little lipstick, but her mom arranged such a glorious photo shoot. Other parents tried with the holiday that the girl and forgot about. The fact that Daddy did not come. The important thing is that you were, Emily said as they drove home. Mommy, you're so wonderful. Thank you, sweet Camille smiled. And then the smile froze on her face. She saw the same brunette walk out of their driveway. Was she really in their apartment? If Christopher was home, then she was. And sure enough, the door was opened for them by Christopher. He was in his bathrobe after a shower. Hello, my girls? He smiled. I had an accident today. A car accident. Emily was horrified. Not a car accident. At work, my secretary poured coffee on me, I twisted my leg. And the cup fell right on my snow-white shirt. Camille, I'm sorry, but I don't know whether to wash it or not. Throw it away, that's all. Indifferently answered Camille, thinking that brunette. How long have you been home? Until 10 minutes ago. When I dropped by, I thought I'd take a quick strip. In the shower for once. Well, Camille grinned and added nothing more, but took the ruined shirt and threw it in the trash in front of her. Surprised husband? Might as well at least try washing it. It's a good shirt. Christopher was confused, but Camille didn't seem to hear him. She kept thinking about that brunette. Christopher's got a nerve. He's taking his mistress home. Well, then she'll hunt them down. Photo, hunt. It's convenient for tonight. Emily's going to her girlfriend's for a few hours. There's adults watching. In short, after dropping her daughter off at her house, Camille headed to her husband's office, hiring another cab driver. The rest of the day passed without much incident. Christopher did not leave the office.
And by 7 o'clock, he came out of the office and dialed someone. Yes, I even heard Christopher's voice. Vanessa, have you met? I can't do it that often. Besides, I think I even suspected something. Yeah, I realize you're not interested.
But I have a wife and a daughter. Something.
Hearing back, Christopher irritably disconnected the phone and got into the car. Camille followed him. Again, Christopher arrived at the same cafe. Camille was able to get a picture of her husband with the car brunette. Here they met. The girl poked Christopher on the cheek. Then they sat at a table. Yes, this time I even clearly saw that there was a relationship between them and far from business. But she didn't even know who she was and decided to go to the maternity hospital, where Christopher drove the girl the first time. The next day, she was at the head doctor's office. "What did you want with our Vanessa?" asked the head doctor, looking at the picture of the girl where she was sitting with her hand on Christopher's shoulder. "I want her to get away from the man sitting next to her," Camille replied. "That's my husband. I love him, but I can see he's just crazy about your Vanessa." "Have you talked to your husband?" "No, I'm having a hard time. I don't know where to start. I don't want to lose him, and at the same time, I can't bear to live any longer." "I thought you as an employer could influence your employee?" "Yes, I will try." The doctor nodded and looked at Camille carefully. Again, at the photograph. "Look, I think I've seen you before. You and your husband?" "Yes. I'm Camille Williams. 5 years ago, my baby died in your clinic. I would never make a move here. But your employee is acting more than a little defiant. Williams, the chief of surgery, had a change of face when he remembered. Yeah, I remember. I'm sorry to hear about that. Don't worry about Vanessa. She's a good pediatric nurse. Oh, there you go, you lovey-dovey. Yeah, she's got that going for her. If she has an affair with your husband, I'll put her in her place in no time." "I doubt it," Camille grinned, "but at least try." Camille walked out of the clinic. On the porch of the building, she froze. Her heart ached again. Yes, 5 years ago she had been very sick here, and now she wasn't feeling the best either. Why had she come here in the first place? Does she think there's anything she can do to stop that insolent nurse? And Christopher. How do I get through to him? Camille rounded the corner and sat down on a bench next to the building. Closing her eyes, she heard a woman's voice. Nearby from an open window. "Hello, Hedgehog!" Camille heard it. "Yes, it's me." "Listen, your wife was here. Turns out she thought we were having an affair." Camille cautiously looked through the window and saw Vanessa. She was standing half-turned and looking at herself in the mirror while talking on the phone. "Basically, all these years. You know I wouldn't mind hooking up with you, but you're resisting." "Why?" "Oopsie-doopsie. Don't boil it down here." After hearing all that, Camille sent and backed up against the wall. So Christopher's not cheating on her, and she's imagining things. In fact, what did she see? How yesterday it was Vanessa. Then windows Christopher on the cheek, and then her palms kept putting her hands on his shoulders and then on his lap. Camille was even glad. Her husband loves only her. But what she heard next literally sealed her to the wall. "Christopher, your Camille was at the head doctor's office. He recognized her, and then he yelled at me like that." "Why?" "For hanging out with you." "What if she figures it out?" "Yeah, she thinks your son is dead." "What if?" "Hypothetically, she gets the idea." Christopher was yelling into the phone. Vanessa was making excuses, and Camille wasn't listening to her anymore. Her eyes were suddenly blurry. What did this Vanessa say? That her son was alive. How could that be? Christopher had buried him himself? He looked her in the eye and told her that her son was gone. Her John. Camille, staggering, reached the bench again and sat down. How long she sat like that, the woman did not remember. Only suddenly she felt someone touch her shoulder. Camille looked up. An elderly woman in a white coat stood next to her. Looks like an orderly? Honey, are you feeling sick? The old lady asked affectionately. Should I call the doctor? No, thank you, I'm fine. Camille shook her head. A doctor won't help me. Have you got a grudge? Yes, I just realized that the man I love has betrayed me. Did your husband take a stroll? It's okay. He'll come back. They're all cables. She goes out, she'll go home, to her wife, to the kids. If only that were the main problem. Camille, look at the old lady's face. She's kind. And then a thought struck her. Excuse me, have you been working at this maternity hospital long? Yes, for many years. I can see you're a good person. There's something I need to know, but it's a long conversation. Give me half an hour. I'm Camille, your name. Nancy. You'd better lie to me, claim. I've already finished my shift. I'll just take off my robe. The nurse nodded in response. Soon the two of them were out of the hospital courtyard. Camille suggested they go to a cafe. And there she told Nancy everything she had heard from the open window. You said Williams was your last name? As if remembering something, Nancy repeated. 5 years ago I was here, and I remember a woman. I think it was you. I forget her last name. Yeah, it was a complicated case. All the doctors were very worried. There was a problem with the Yiddy because it was their fault. The woman had to have a cesarean, and they made her give birth. There was something wrong with the baby. But he's alive, that's for sure. I heard the head doctor say that the baby should be transferred to a baby home. His parents had given up on him, and I wondered why they refused. The baby is quite normal in appearance, but they're screaming. So what? There were no fatalities, that's for sure. Nancy, maybe you're confused. I'm not confusing anything. For the last 5 years, everyone in our maternity ward has survived. There have been weak babies, heavy moms, but they've all survived. So my John is alive. And that's exactly what Vanessa said about my baby. So she's in on it. And the head doctor. And Christopher. Oh my God, Christopher. So he's been hiding the truth from me all these years. And he's been hanging out with this Vanessa. Oh, it's Vanessa by weight. Never mind her. And about the baby, Camille, I'll find out. I promise. Don't tell your husband anything yet. My daughter's been working at the orphanage for a long time. Maybe she'll tell you something about your baby? I don't know anything about him. Sobbing on her hands. I just named him John. I don't even know his blood type. But you do remember the date of birth, don't you? Sure, it was September. 5/5, okay. September 5 years ago. I'll check with my daughter. They exchanged phone numbers and said goodbye. Camille was walking home, and many people didn't want to go. She couldn't see her husband. There was so much to tell him, so much to ask him. But Camille was afraid to hear the whole truth. And most importantly, she had no one to share it with. Christopher had taken all her friends away. There were no relatives, just her daughter. The thought of Emily gave her a little strength, too. She had a daughter waiting for her at home. Emily's mom ran out into the hallway to meet her. Where was that? I missed you so much. Indeed you have. A disgruntled Christopher looked out of the room. I arrived and my daughter was home. All she had to eat was sandwiches. Camille said nothing to her husband, did not even look at him. She was all in her own thoughts. She held her daughter to her, kissed her. What is it, sweetheart? Hungry? A little bit, Emily admitted. But I had tea with Daddy. Don't worry, I've just come from the guests. They saw me off. You're my good girl. I'll cook something. And Camille went into the kitchen without looking at her husband. Camille, what's going on? Christopher followed her. Why aren't you talking to me? Where have you been all day? Do you really want to know? Camille looked at her husband point blank. Yes. He held her gaze. I don't understand your tone. I even wanted to say all my suspicions, but at the last moment I held back. It wasn't time yet. Christopher, I think you're cheating on me, she said suddenly. Yeah. Christopher even choked and then laughed. Camille, have you been watching soap operas? I've been Stephen for days so you and Emily could have the best of everything. When do I cheat on you? Then? Who's Vanessa? Christopher's face changed for a second. Then he gave a surprised look, as if remembering how Vanessa was a brunette. Vanessa is a nurse. That's my classmate. Why are you asking about her? I saw you two together at the cafe yesterday. Christopher's cheekbones reddened. He was visibly nervous, but after a second he pulled himself together. Yes, she made an appointment for me yesterday. We're having a class reunion this summer. So she called me in to discuss the details. Where we're going to celebrate Christopher was lying on the fly, and Camille knew it. But she pretended to believe him? You're not lying to me. Come on, sweethearts. Christopher smiled. I have only you in my heart. And he accosted his wife, kissed her. She even wanted to push him away, to shout at him, to ask him where their son was. But she restrained herself from the last strength, just put her head on his shoulder, and would be silent for a long time. And then she pulled away and went about preparing dinner. Is the incident over? He asked cheerfully. Yes, dear Camille even smiled back at him, but she was thinking about whether Nancy would find out or not. And at night, she had a dream. She was walking the poolway through the woods, and suddenly a wolf stepped out of the bushes toward her. Camille froze for a moment and looked into the beast's eyes. Then suddenly, a child's cry was heard in the distance. Camille shuddered. The beast also flinched. The wolf rushed to where the child's cries were coming from. Camille ran after him. A little boy was sitting in the clearing, smearing tears on his cheeks. He looked around helplessly. Mom suddenly screamed. He, seeing Camille, got up and ran to her. But there was a wolf ahead. The beast grabbed the child by his shirt and pulled him behind him. No, no, screamed Camille. Don't touch him. Let him go. She ran after the wolf, screaming, crying. For a second, the wolf stopped, looked at her, and then Camille realized it wasn't the wolf, It was Christopher. A second more, and they and the child dissipated like a fog. Give him back, Camille repeated. She was shaken. She woke to Christopher shaking her by the shoulder. Camille! Camille, what's wrong? Christopher leaned over his wife. Wake up! She opened her eyes. Her head hurt. Her heart was pounding frantically. Sticky, nasty. Sweat protruded on her forehead. Her teeth ached from clenching her jaws hard. What a nightmare. Christopher looked into her eyes. Did you scream so terribly? Yes, a scary dream. Exhaled, she said. Were you calling for someone? I didn't understand. And I dreamt of our son. Camille, darling, it's been so long. Quiet, quiet. Calm down. It's over. It's just a dream. Christopher held her close to him. I'm afraid, like a child. Camille quieted down, a little calmer. Hey! Could it really be that she had imagined everything? Everything she had learned the night before was just a coincidence. But she had heard Christopher and this Vanessa talking. Camille pulled away from Christopher. It's okay. I'll go back to sleep. She covered herself with the blanket and turned her head away from her husband. Soon he lay down beside her, with his arms around her. He even wanted to throw off his hateful hand, but she did not even aghast. Let him sleep. She herself lay awake until morning, without sleep or thought. Her head felt as if it were empty. In the morning, Christopher kissed her and left for work. Emily slept in the nursery, dozing off, and even she was awakened by a phone call. It was Nancy calling. Camille, how are you there? Asked the woman, as if they had known each other for 1,000 years. What's that voice for? It was still the 11th hour. I haven't slept all night. Camille answered stiffly. All sorts of thoughts came into my head.
So you pull yourself together. I just found out something that made me sit up so hard on the bed. You're saying this isn't a phone call? You come over to my place about 3 o'clock and my daughter will be here. I'll tell her what?
Camille immediately jumped out of bed, frantically began to pack. Then she sat down and calmed down a little. There was still time. She went to the kitchen and prepared lunch. Soon Emily woke up as a mom. What do we smell so good? Rubbing her eyes, her daughter asked. I made your favorite red soup, smiled Camille, meaning borscht. Let's wash up. You buy it and we'll go with you. Where to? The girl was surprised. To a very nice grandmother. I met her recently. You'll sit quietly at her place, and I'll talk to her daughter. About some simple grown-up stuff. Camille kissed her daughter, sighed, and wondered what truth awaited her there. Maybe she shouldn't take her daughter with her, but she couldn't leave her home alone. They would go together. Soon she called a cab and left at the appointed time. They came running. The woman lived in the private sector in a small but neat house. Now it was all drowned in blossoming apple trees of lilac cherry. Nancy went out on the porch to the guests. How nice it is here! Camilla smiled as she said hello to her hostess. What a grown-up daughter you have, smiled Nancy. But hello, young lady. Come with me to the vegetable garden. Mama is expected in the house to talk and will only be in the way. I just need to water the tomatoes and cabbage. Tomatoes! Emily was surprised. They are already red. Something is coming. These are still very small installments, and the time will come, and the fruits will set. Nancy took the girl by the hand, and they went to the plot, and Camille stepped into the house. Out of the tiny kitchen peered a woman in her 50s. A little full, hair pulled back in a bun with glasses. Camille. Nancy's stern daughter, hello? The woman nodded. My name is Evelyn. My mom told me your story. To be honest, I'm not at liberty to divulge such things, but this is a little different. Evelyn invited Camille to the table, poured tea, and began her story. Exactly 5 years ago, she was appointed director of the orphanage.
And just then, some abandoned babies were brought in from the maternity hospital. It was a boy. The doctors gave him a disappointing diagnosis. They believed that the child's brain had been damaged as a result
of a difficult delivery. The question of transferring the boy to a specialized institution was decided, but something there kept postponing. Time passed, and one day it became clear that the baby was perfectly healthy. He was developing like everyone else growing up. Evelyn looked sadly at the boy and thought that as a result of a medical error, the parents had so easily given up the child. They hadn't even fought for him, but it was none of her business. Soon, Masha came to work at the orphanage. She was a little over 30. She immediately gravitated to the refuseniks and soon set herself the goal of adopting a boy. The fact is that she and her husband had no children of their own. They'd been in treatment for a long time. But it wasn't even about her. It was about her husband. But there was no money either. So they decided to adopt a child. As a result, they managed to take the baby home with them. I don't know if it's your boy or not, but the birth center matches. And the date of birth. I've already said I'm not at liberty to divulge any of this, but... Evelyn was silent for a second, then gathered her courage. It wasn't long before Masha's cancer ate her up in a matter of months. Her husband Robert and the boy were left alone, knowing that they had moved in with their mother. And everything would be fine? But Robert started drinking heavily. His mother's sick. The boy is on his own. Wait, S! Camille screamed. And she was suddenly struck by a clue. What's the boy's name? The orphanage called him Stephen. Stephen cried out. And Camille, is it really him? You don't get it? Evelyn was surprised. Camille confusedly told her about meeting the boy she had been photographing. She took out her camera, which she was in the habit of carrying with her everywhere, and found the pictures she wanted. That's him. Camille jabbed her finger at the image on the camera screen. I remember him very small, Evelyn admitted, but he looks like a scarlet light. Yes, very similar. Evelyn hesitated. She wanted to add that the boy looked like Camille too, but she stopped herself. What if it's all a mistake? Mom, it turns out that tomatoes are so small in the beginning. A delighted Emily appeared on the doorstep. I was watering them. Nancy said I could come and help and water them. We'll come again, won't we, Mom? Yes, yes, of course. Camille had a small shiver after talking to Evelyn. Could that Stephen really be her son? She looked at Nancy. Thank you. What I can't understand is that you didn't know me at all, but you suddenly volunteered to help. Why? It's an old score with the head doctor. Nancy smiled sadly. I was a midwife in that hospital all my life. I was accused of negligence before I retired. A woman died because of me. I was suspended from work and deprived of the right to the benefits that medics are entitled to. And I was not to blame for that situation. The chief physician was operating then, and it was unfortunate no one would listen to me. They only hired me as a nurse, so I went. I had to make a living. If your story is true, the head doctor will fly upside down from his chair. I see, Camille replied. You can be sure that if my son is alive, there will be little room for all those guilty in this story. And the head doctor, and my husband too. Emily listened attentively to the adults and didn't understand anything. Mom, what son were you talking about? Asked the girl when they were driving home. When she came to her senses, she asked Camilla, I will tell you everything, only a little later. Don't tell Daddy anything about our visit and don't tell him what you heard. You got a deal? Good, the girl nodded. Camille realized that she had made a mistake in talking business in front of her daughter, but there was no going back. Back at the house, she persuaded Emily to take a little more walk in the park. Her daughter agreed. Camille hoped that she would see Stephen today, and it was as if the Lord had heard her pleas. As soon as they sat down on a bench in the park, he came running, as usual, at a gallop. I've got you, Camille! He shouted joyfully and smiled. Where have you disappeared? Were you afraid of my father then? You shouldn't be. He's a good man. He's just sad. Do you know what he did to that picture you gave me? That Camille got all tense inside? He framed it on the wall in the hall. Grandma really liked it too. She said the photographer's hands were in the right place. Thank you, Camille laughed. Let's get to know each other. This is my daughter, Emily. The girl nodded to the boy and looked at her mother, confusedly. Emily, this is Stephen, my good acquaintance. A good acquaintance with no end of noses. Do you have a cold or something? Stephen is worried. Camille, it's summer outside. Where did you catch a cold? I ate too much ice cream. Daddy got a new job. We have money now. The boy smiled happily. He bought me a new pair of jeans. Camille noticed that Michael was both a boy and new. Yes, the boy changed his clothes. You look great. Camille smiled and took the disposable handkerchiefs out of her purse. Let me give you a nose job on the subway. And she immediately did it cleverly. Stephen didn't even have time to realize it, and Camille had already hidden the handkerchief in a separate bag. Then, the three of them walked around a bit more. Camille ran to the drugstore and bought some vitamins. Afterwards, they walked the boy home. He's a good kid, Emily smiled. Average like us. Yes, Mom. Like us? Camille nodded thoughtfully. Emily, will you stay home alone for an hour? I have some errands to run. I won't be long, okay? Camille's mom drove her daughter home and went to a private clinic for genetic analysis. The handkerchief she lost her nose with was suitable for examination. When she got home, she was met by a furious Christopher. Where have you been again? He shouted. The daughter is alone again. Camille, what are you doing? Where did you take my daughter during the day? Her mom was hanging out, Emily whispered guiltily. Nothing. Daughter is reassuring. Camille smiled at her and looked at her husband. Christopher, I have things to do. I went to see some good acquaintances of mine. What acquaintances can you have that I don't know about? And what's that? You have a family, a husband, and a child. You're supposed to take care of the house, and you didn't cook dinner again. The house is a mess. The house is in order. Camille said calmly, Is there food in the fridge? It's warming up. She went to the kitchen, but Christopher grabbed her arm. What child were you looking for that Emily was talking about? Camille, are you losing your mind? No. And I, more than ever in reason, pulled back my hand, Camille answered. And since you ask, I will say yes, I am searching for my son. But he's gone. Kyle, come to your senses. No, you definitely need a doctor. We'll go to the doctor tomorrow. And you'll give him money to declare me incompetent? Yes. Money? How much did you pay then? The head doctor of the maternity hospital to have our son put in an orphanex. Christopher even woke up when he heard that. Then he started to assure me that Camille had made it all up. That's just the way it was. The child hadn't survived, but Camille didn't listen to him, and she wasn't going to prove anything. She had other things on her mind. What would the DNA test show? She hadn't told her husband about it yet. 10 days passed waiting. During that time, Camille had hardly spoken to her husband. She took her daughter to the park. There they met Stephen, and the three of them had fun. Stephen talked about his family. His father worked all day at some computer firm. Yes, his name was Robert. Camille had so many coincidences in her heart with excitement. Stephen's grandmother hardly ever walked, only around the apartment a little. My mom's name was Molly. And her life was taken by a serious illness. Stephen told her many things about his life as they sat in cafes, walked around the city, and Camille waited. Finally, she received a call from the clinic, informing her there was a result. Camille drove to the clinic with a sinking heart. What will they tell her? I don't understand anything, she said in excitement to the lab technician, who brought her the documents. Camille looked at the numbers, but could not believe it. The results say that you and the person whose biomaterial was provided, close relatives. How close, like mother and son, for example? Camille cried out when she heard that. And then she cried, yes, Stephen is her son. This is her John, whom she has mourned for so many years, alive. That night, she decided to lay all her cards on the table in front of her husband. Christopher came home late as usual. Emily was already asleep. Camille was sitting on the couch in the living room. She was holding the DNA evidence. What are you studying? Christopher asked rudely, instead of greeting her. During these days, the relationship between them had completely deteriorated. I found my son, Camille replied calmly. He is alive and well. What kind of nonsense are you talking about again? Christopher exclaimed. Oh my God, you're really hurting more than prison is crying for you? Without raising his tone, said Camille. Maybe you will now tell us how you got rid of our son. You looked me in the eye for years and lied to me. You put our child in an orphanage when I was between life and death. Christopher suddenly just kind of hustled. Then he took the paperwork from the clinic, read it. Why don't you say something? Camille tugged on his sleeve. Now look me in the eye and tell me that our John is dead. How did you find him? Christopher said in an unexpectedly hoarse voice. Vanessa and I have been looking for him for almost 6 months, and so you and Vanessa. Tell me, Camille demanded. Tell me what? Christopher shrugged. When the doctor said that our son would be mentally retarded, I immediately decided that we didn't need all this. Torturing him, making him suffer. Vanessa worked at the maternity hospital, and she was a pediatric nurse too. Yeah, she's actually a classmate of mine. I talked to her, told her you didn't want to give up this baby, and then she suggested this option of paying the head doctor for a certificate of the child's death. That's how it worked out. I did the waiver while you were unconscious. They gave me the certificate, and I buried the empty robbery. And then the boy was taken to an orphanage. So while I was mourning him, he was there in the maternity ward. Camille could barely hold back the tears. And you lied to me? Camille, I meant, well, why do we need a handicapped child? You decided for me? You robbed me of my son. What difference does it make what he is? I would have loved him anyway. But the most important thing is that he's a normal, good, bright kid. Doesn't it hurt your heart knowing your son is growing up with strangers? I've been following his fate all this time. Yeah, a year later. I found out he was adopted and seemed okay. Yes, I blamed myself for what I did. But what could I do? I decided to forget the story. So through Vanessa, I only found out how he was doing. And then the boy's foster mom died, and he and his foster dad disappeared. Vanessa and I looked for them, but couldn't find them. Vanessa, Camille grinned. She's been chumming it up for you too, you have to admit. She was even in our house when your secretary supposedly spilled coffee on your shirt. I saw that Vanessa outside our driveway, and then you in the house in your bathrobe. Christopher shook his head. There was no way he could confess. Vanessa had been in their apartment then. They had met to discuss where to look for the boy and his foster father. Christopher had run home for a moment to get some paperwork for work. Vanessa waited for him in the car and then suddenly came up to get him. He opened the door, touched the door. She hugged him, pressed herself against him, began to take off her clothes. It was an obsession, a mistake. It happened fast. Christopher afterwards began to say that his wife could come any minute. Vanessa smiled understandingly and left. Then Camille came in. Yes, he had cheated on her. But only once. But he couldn't admit it. Camille! We were just looking for that child with Vanessa, he repeated stubbornly. The boy! The child! You speak of him as if he were a stranger. Christopher, this is your own son? His name is Stephen now. I only have a daughter. Christopher raised his voice. And that's enough of that. Let him grow up in another family, which is fine, as I understand it. That's good. What's good about it? Camille exclaimed. I won't let it go. I'll make sure my son grows up with me. Forget it. Christopher shook his head. I won't allow it. And if you make a fuss, I'm with you. I'll make a fuss. And I'll take Emily. The court will give her to me. What the hell are you, Asar? You're worthless, unemployed, sitting on my ass. You're nothing without me. That's how you talk. Camille grinned. Didn't you make me like this? But you shouldn't think I'm so poor. I'll leave you and take my daughter away from you. That night, Camille slept in her daughter's room, but it was hardly sleep. All night, the woman just lay with her eyes closed, and she thought and thought, what should she do now? She could not go on living as before. Christopher disgusted her, and Stephen must be taken away. And Emily, she would not give. She even opened her eyes this morning. As soon as the front door slammed behind her husband, she kissed her sleepy daughter. She carefully got out of bed and walked to the window. A new day was beginning, and Camille was starting a new life. She was getting used to the idea of having her son around. It would only be a short time before they would be together. But according to Stephen's stories, it turned out that the family loved him, even though they lived simply and the father drank for a while. But the latter was understandable. He'd been through the death of his wife, but he seemed to be all right now. By lunchtime, when Emily was already watching a children's TV program in her room, Camille made up her mind. "Daughter, I'm going out for half an hour. You stay home alone." She looked in on Emily. Her daughter nodded in reply. Camilla had calculated everything. Christopher wouldn't be home for another 7 hours. And Robert, Stefan's foster father, is coming home at lunchtime. They need to meet and talk. Grabbing the DNA test papers, Camille headed toward the older 5-story building. Stephen was left boy, long ago told and in what entranceway lives, and in what apartment. The door was opened by an elderly full woman on the move. "How? Who are you to see?" She was surprised, after the occasion, looking at the guest. "I don't know you." "My name is Camille," the woman said worriedly. Your grandson and I sometimes walk together in the park." "Camille," the woman smiled. "Poroshenko talked about you, a picture you made good? Come." Stephen ran to the neighbor. "We're out of salt." Robert came for lunch, and I undersalted the soup. And as luck would have it, the straw was empty. "So, is Robert home?" "Yeah, but he's at lunch. I'd like to talk to him." "I'm sorry, I don't know your first name, or middle name, but it's really important. They call me Wendy Taylor." "Wendy Taylor. Would you call Robert, please?" The old lady shrugged her shoulders and shouted, "Son, come here!" The tall man came out of the kitchen. He looked less gloomy now than he had at their previous meeting. "Did you want to talk about help?" he asked. "Forgive me for my harshness and the mood I was in." "Of course you can communicate. I realized you're a good person." "Thank you. But I have one more thing to do with you. Maybe we could go out into the courtyard." Okay." Robert nodded, glancing at his watch. "You'll forgive me for taking up your vows, but it's very important." "Sure, I already realized that." Robert grinned. On the landing, they met Stephen. "Aunt Camille?" The boy was surprised. "Hello, Stephen." Camille almost burst out sunny. She could hardly contain herself. I come to talk to your father." "About what?" the child asked in a businesslike manner. "Pavel, what's with the interrogations?" Robert grinned. "Go to the apartment, or grandmother and Olya are waiting there." "By the way, did you get it?" "Yes, it's important," answered Stephen, and pulled a small bag out of his pocket. "Aunt Raya said I shouldn't give it to her. Otherwise," she said, "we'll quarrel. I only took a kopeck, as my grandmother used to say." "Oh, these omens!" Camille smiled. "Yes, it's the 20th century. And we believe in all this nonsense." Robert agreed. "Who knows? Maybe there's something to it." So, chatting, they went downstairs and sat down on a bench. Camille was getting her wits about her. "Camille, I have to go to work in half an hour." "I work nearby, but we're strict about schedules," Robert said. "Yeah," Camille nodded and pulled out some papers. "What's this? This?" "It may seem absurd, but I am Stephen's real mom." Robert looked at Camille without understanding. Then he looked at the papers. Camille, worried, immediately began her explanation. She told everything as it happened. Robert listened to her with his head down. "I won't ask you how you found us," he said at last. "But if you try to take the pack from me, I won't keep quiet either. I'll go to court." "Robert, I'm in shock myself," Camille tried to explain. "I don't want any litigation, especially since my husband's not acting right in this situation. I just want to communicate with Stephen. And what are you going to tell him? That you gave birth to him and left him? Look, he thinks of another woman as his mother. Do you have any idea what that would do to the baby? I understand, and I don't know how to make it better. That's why I came to you, just to talk to you for now." We'll find a solution together. I believe that. Are you laughing together? You threw away a sick child like a worthless kitten, and now you've come to your senses. I didn't throw him away. It doesn't change anything. What do you want me to give you, Stephen? What do you want him for? You have a daughter, or raise her. Especially since, as you say, your husband isn't happy about finding your son. I'll leave my husband. I'm not going to live after what happened to him anyway. And I don't need that information. And don't come to us anymore from Poland. I forbid it. Do you see? Robert stood up resolutely and headed for the entrance without looking back. Camille remained seated on the bench. She looked petrified. Yes, Robert is understandable, but who can understand her? 5 years ago, she was lied to and robbed of her child. And now that she's suddenly found him, it turns out she has no rights. And indeed, Stephen considers that dead woman to be her mother. Camille cried. That's how she suddenly found her son. And at the same time, she can't get him back. Should she get over herself and try to reconcile with Christopher for the sake of her son? Convince him to give the baby back? After all, Christopher has good lawyer connections. But as soon as Camille remembered her husband's eyes, remembered that the one looking at her, he was lying. She's so old. He was silent as she drove to her son's empty grave. She'd held on, and he'd been silent. No, she would never forgive him for that. Camille slowly approached the house. At the driveway, she saw her husband's car. The next moment, her husband and Emily came out of the house. The mother was happy to see her daughter and rushed to Camille, but Christopher intercepted her. "Get in the car," he commanded the girl. "Mom said get in the car," shouted Christopher from behind her, pushed Emily into the cabin, then turned to Camille. "What were you thinking? You can behave however you want. Who the hell do you think you are? You're supposed to do what I tell you to do. I told you very clearly. Forget about that kid. What did you do?" Immediately ran to his foster daddy. That lady was crying, saying, "What kind of husband is bad? How do you know?" "I followed you. I saw you sitting on the bench. How did he send you away?" "Well, here's the thing. Emily and I are leaving right now. I won't tell you where, but I don't want your spirit in the apartment in 2 days. I'm divorcing them from you. If you obstruct me, I won't let you see your daughter. Do you understand?" No, you don't dare do this to me," screamed Camille. She cried. "What's my fault? Did you act like the last scoundrel? You say you followed me? Didn't you want to look at your son?" "He's her son." Christopher cut her off. Meanwhile, Emily was crying in the car. Christopher got in the car and drove away. Camille rushed after her daughter, but stopped empty-handed. Then she fell to the pavement and collapsed into sobs. Her life had shattered into small pieces. Now, how do you put it back together? Robert was on his way to work, and after talking to Camille, the mother was found. Wow, what a mother. Poor, unfortunate people. Robert remembered the first time she and Molly had brought a bundle from the baby house. He was just a baby. Then he got stronger, grew up. The doctors were a total dunce, and the baby was perfectly healthy. And he walked on time, and he even spoke for the territory. And then he was unstoppable. And that was it. Their family was fine. If Molly hadn't gotten sick, at first they thought it was nothing serious. And when the doctors figured it out, it was too late to do anything. Molly died, and Robert loved her so much. They'd been together since high school. Molly was waiting for him to get out of the army. They dreamed of having a big, close-knit family. But the big family didn't work out. When Robert was left alone with a baby in his arms, he was so sad. He even started drinking, quit his job. He was a good programmer. Wendy Taylor, having assessed the situation, immediately insisted on moving in with her. Robert listened to her and gradually came to his senses. He went back to work. Yes, he realized that Stephen spends a lot of time alone in the garden he needs. His mother is very sick, but it's okay. They'll manage. And then all of a sudden, this birth mom shows up. She's lying, of course, that she didn't give up her son. Those were the thoughts in Robert's head as he neared the new house. The man saw the whole ugly picture and how Christopher was pushing his daughter into the car, how he was yelling at Camille, what he was yelling at her. Robert could not believe that a father could talk like that about his own child. There was a moment when he already wanted to walk over and punch this town, but Christopher had left. Robert walked over to Camille, held out his hand to her. "Camille, calm down, please," he said. "Don't cry." You, wiping away the tears, surprised Camille. "What are you doing here? I was just coming. I saw your husband." "Yes, now I believe you. A man like that would do a mean thing. He wouldn't even blink an eye. He'll take Emily away from me," Camille exclaimed. "I don't know what to do. First, you have to calm down. Go home. Here's my phone number. I dictated mine. I'll call you tonight." Robert held out a piece of paper torn from his notebook. He wrote down the phone number Camille had dictated. "Please don't cry. Believe me, as long as we're alive, everything can be fixed." He walked her to the driveway and hurried to work. The rest of the day, Camille lay curled up on the couch, unable to sleep. She couldn't get up. Her strength had left her. She dialed her daughter's number several times, but the phone was out of range. Then she got a call. Without looking, Camille shouted into the receiver. "Excuse me? Is this Robert?" She heard a confused male voice. "Oh, I'm sorry." Camille sighed. "I thought it was Emily. I'm standing in your driveway. Let's talk." "Yeah, come on in." Camille called out the apartment number. Soon, the guest was on the doorstep. Camille shook a little, put the kettle on in the kitchen. "Are you all right?" noted Robert, looking around the apartment. "It's not my apartment," replied Camille sadly. "It's Christopher's property, and he's kicking me out. That's how I thought I'd leave my husband and daughter. But he threw me out and took my daughter." "Do you have somewhere else to go?" "Honestly, no. You know, I'm so sick I don't want to live. But you have to live. You know, even I was thinking all the time at work about what you told me, what I saw today with my own eyes, and I realized one thing. Don't resist fate. Let everything go as it goes, and you'll see, everything will work out. So Christopher will give me my daughter?" "Never, but you still have a son, and you won't give him to me. On top of that, I'm homeless now." "Do you have anyone you can turn to for help?" She didn't even say anything. She just grinned sadly. Yes, Christopher had done everything over the years to leave her alone and completely dependent on him. Robert understood that without words. He thought about something for a while and then shook his head decisively. "Go where?" Camille was confused. "Stay with us. Mom won't mind. Stefan will be pleased. Do you know how attached he is to you? He always comes home from a walk and tells me how he walked with you, how he played with your daughter. He's drawn to you. And I can't live without him anymore," Camille said quietly. "Nor without Emily." Robert made no reply. Yes, now he saw that he was looking at an unhappy young woman who had faced a great deal of lies and betrayal in her life. How could he help her? Robert had little idea, but purely humanly, he could not help but respond to her pain. Camille agreed to his proposal, and in a couple of hours, she was already leaving the apartment, where for so many years she had made a cozy family nest. Turned around to say goodbye. Let everything stay and don't take anything with you. Just the necessary things. A camera, pictures of my daughter. I brought my papers, of course. Wendy Taylor, but when she saw a guest she already knew, she was very surprised. They weren't whispering in the kitchen, huh? Camille and Stephen were sitting in the hall. The boy showed her toys, books. Stephen was so happy. "Where's Emily?" The boy remembered. "Is she going to live with us, too?" No, sighed Camille. She's with Daddy for now, but hopefully we'll be able to see her soon. In the meantime, let's have a look at this book. She took the ABC book, and she and Stephen began to study the letters. The boy already knew more than half of them. What a good boy you are, Camille marveled. A little more, and we'll be reading with you. Yes, Stephen has a good memory. Camille heard the voice of Wendy Taylor behind her. The woman stood in the doorway and watched the guests studying with her grandson. Robert had told her everything now. Wendy Taylor was confused. Why had her son brought this woman into the house? Abandoned her child, and now she was wondering. But Robert tried to explain that Camille had hurt herself. All right, son, let her live. Wendy Taylor agreed. Time would tell what would come of it. And looking at Camille and Stephen, she noted how alike they were. What an amazing story. In the back of Wendy Taylor's mind, Wendy Taylor had even wondered if her son might be getting along with this Camille. He's not much older than her. It would make a good couple, and Stephen would have a full family. It's been 2 days. Camille is slowly settling into her new place. She quickly cleaned Wendy Taylor's apartment, cooked various delicious things to perfection. The old woman appreciated the guests' efforts and was already hinting to her son to take a closer look. Robert pretended not to understand. Stephen's mother followed Camille with a tale, then with cleaning, then with cooking. He forgot all about the street. He only asked about Emily. For Camille, such questions stabbed her in the heart. She didn't know anything. Emily's phone was still silent. Christopher was dropping her calls. And then Camille saw her husband's car pull up to their house, and he got out with Vanessa. It made Camille so angry. He'd assured her there was nothing wrong with Vanessa, and then he took her to the apartment. Camille caught up with them. "What are you doing here?" Christopher asked rudely when he saw Camille. "Where's my daughter?" She was blocking their way. "None of your business," he replied. "I've already filed the papers with the court. You'll get a summons. The judge will determine the days you can see your daughter. Don't be surprised. I know where you live. Good people followed me, just as I thought you were a fallen woman. When you were alone, you ran to this guy who's raising a kid. So how's it going with him?" "I'm a fallen woman," Camille grinned. "I don't take lovers into my apartment. Unlike you, I'm a fallen man." "Look at your companion, Christopher," Vanessa exclaimed. "What does she say?" Actually, she was indignant just for the sake of order, but in fact, rejoiced. At last, Christopher is hers. Yes, she had gotten her way. After all these years, they're together. After all, then in the maternity hospital, she was our first experience. Was Christopher that he had an abnormal son. Told all sorts of scary stories. The doctors were cautious in their prognosis. Vanessa described to Christopher all the horrors of life with such a diagnosis that was given to a newborn. Christopher believed it and agreed to give up the baby. Vanessa brought him all the papers from the doctor personally, and she was able to settle the whole story quietly too. Vanessa had Jenna thinking that, after all this, Christopher would leave his wife and go to her. She'd give him a healthy baby, but no, Christopher stayed in the family. And that made Vanessa so angry. She decided to be with Christopher all the time, to find out about the boy, to pass on the news about him, emphasizing that if the boy is healthy now, it means nothing. The disease could manifest itself at any moment. And all the time, the power went to Christopher like a fox. He was a rock in the beginning, but water treads water. Vanessa got what she wanted anyway, and it all worked out so well. Now Christopher would definitely leave Camille. Vanessa was a little upset that Christopher had taken her daughter, but she reasoned let the court leave her daughter to her father, and then she will convince Christopher to give the girl to some elite boarding school. Let her live at a distance. That's where they're sending her now. It's time to get used to it. And now, this Camille comes running up screaming, "Christopher! She's insulting me!" Vanessa is outraged. Christopher is all pop. Even he looked at Camille in anger. "Don't you dare say anything bad about Vanessa, and forget about coming here. We'll be divorced soon, and you can live with your puppy." "That puppy is your son too, huh?" Camille said bitterly. "Although how many times do I have to say it? Christopher, I want you to hear me. I will not report you to the police. I will keep quiet about what happened in our family. But you're gonna give me Emily back too. Get Emily back." Christopher grinned. "Now, my daughter will live with me. I don't care if you're out there. I'll report you to the police. I've got connections that'll shut you up." And that was the end of their conversation. Christopher and Vanessa walked down the driveway, and Camille watched them go. No, she wasn't crying or even angry. Her soul was finally ripe with grandiose plans to destroy her husband. She didn't want that. No, she didn't forgive him. There was no forgiveness for such a thing. But even offered an option for them to work things out quietly. He wouldn't. That evening, Camille asked Robert how good a programmer he was. "People don't seem to complain," Robert shrugged. "What's up?" "Yes, I want to get into Christopher's accounting department at work. I don't think it's clean. I suspect that there is a double bookkeeping decided to dump her husband." Robert smiled. "I didn't start it," Camille replied thoughtfully. "He keeps yelling that I won't get the truth from the prosecutor's office, from the police about the children. So I'll go another way. I have to get into their accounting reports and send them to the tax office. Let them look into it. In the meantime, I'll contact the magazine where I used to work, offer them an exclusive interview about life with a man who loves no one but himself, not even his own child. Well, I'm not going to change your mind. You're doing the right thing." In the evening, Robert was able to connect to the computer of Christopher, the firm's chief accountant, as well as to his computer. And indeed, Camille was right. Large sums of money were going into dummy accounts. Double bookkeeping was going on. All the data was copied. Camille sent them to the IRS, and then she was met at the magazine's editorial office. "Camille, very sorry to see you leave our publication." "You're a good photographer," said the editor-in-chief. "I wouldn't mind coming back, but as I recall, your husband is against you working, and it doesn't matter anymore. He and I are getting a divorce. I've been meaning to tell you about my life with him." The editor-in-chief was very surprised, and at first he seemed to say no. But a few days later, word got out on the internet that Christopher was dirty. The IRS started investigating. And that's when the editor got excited. He remembered Camilla's offer of exclusive material. "Hi, did you change your mind about doing the interview? Did the editor even call?" "No. Anytime you say." She responded readily. And the next day, Camille was talking about her life with Christopher, how he'd cheated on her. "I know he's having a lot of trouble at work right now," Camille summarized. "It's no wonder he's always thinking about himself. The lust for profit must have gotten into his head." She didn't say a word about the fact that Christopher had robbed her of her child a few years ago. Robert, when he read the finished article in the magazine, wondered why. "I don't want my name, Stephen's name, among other things, being bandied about. Yes, all those responsible for that situation should be punished. But now it is more important for me that the court gives me Emily," Camille explained. "With this interview, the firm needed to show that her husband's finances and morals were not good. And you did it on the sly, didn't you? Get it, Robert? Now, they're gonna give you Emily for sure. Do you know where she's been all this time, by the way? I know, she finally got through to me. Christopher put her in a private boarding house so she wouldn't interfere. That's how much he loves his daughter." Emily was crying, begging me to pick her up. I promised I'd see her soon. Camille was silent for a moment, thinking. I should probably not look for a place to live. Don't you know if anyone's ready Why would you want to? Robert was surprised. Of course I am. If they give me Emily, and I'm sure they will, we have to live somewhere. We can't make you feel cramped. Although, to be honest, I'm having a hard time without Stephen. No one has to go anywhere. Suddenly, there was the voice of Wendy Taylor. She had been standing outside the door the whole time and heard the whole conversation.
We're not going to put everything here, are we? So she's thinking of renting an apartment. You're rich, aren't you? And Stephen, how can we do it without you? Where there's one child, there'll be two. Thank you, Camille smiled. To be honest, I was hoping you'd say that. That's not what I'm worried about, Robert said. You've got a place to live and a job. Christopher has more financial resources anyway. Do you think I gave an interview to a magazine for nothing?
Camille laughed. They hired me and offered me a very good salary. So I was prepared for the trial. Then there was the divorce proceedings, and the court took everything into account. The recent events at Christopher's firm and his relationship with another woman. In the end, even Christopher was divorced, leaving the daughter with her mother. In addition, the court also considered the application for division of property, and Christopher had to pay Camille almost half of it. She's getting back at him! When Vanessa heard the ruling, she screamed across the room. For putting the baby in foster care? What child? The judge was surprised. What orphanage? Vanessa, realizing that she had talked too much, tried to talk nonsense, but in the end she burst into tears and told everything. Camille, why didn't you say a word about this story? Strictly asked the judge, having listened to Vanessa. After all, you are the injured party. I didn't want to stir things up. Why? My son is with me now. You gave me my daughter back. And I don't want revenge on anyone. Life will work itself out. But now, the prosecutor's office will obviously take care of it, said the judge. Vanessa shrieked when she heard that. Christopher turned pale. You fool. He whispered to Vanessa. She burst into tears. A little time passed after these events, and soon Camille and Christopher met again in court. Vanessa and the other staff of the hospital, including the head doctor, were there. They were all visibly disturbed, and for good reason. In the end, the head doctor was stripped of his position, suspended for several years. Vanessa also received a suspended sentence. But Christopher avoided criminal responsibility this time. He got off with compensation for moral damage, Camille. No small amount, but the sum came out just like that. How much was the cost of their former apartment with Christopher? The ex-husband did not argue, just gave her the documents for housing. After the court, Christopher had nothing left but to load his belongings into the car, all that he had left, and leave town, where no one knows where. Vanessa, by the way, refused to go anywhere. She's in the market selling cosmetics now. After a few months, Camille and the children returned to their old nest. Now there was nothing to remind her of her old surroundings. Robert had done a good job of renovating the place, and now his wife was even together. It just sort of worked itself out. They were just friends, and then love. So much so that Camille realized this is what it feels like. Bashki! They hadn't told the whole truth yet, and probably never would. Why would he want to know that the person closest to him had betrayed him? He is still a little boy, and gradually forgets that he used to have another mom, even his most beloved and dear one. And Emily loves her brother very much. At first, she missed her own daddy a little, but then it passed. Uncle Robert is very good and loves Mommy so much. Very happy for everyone, Wendy. Finally, her son is happy. There is one other person in this story who is happy with the outcome. That's Nancy. The doctor in charge has been punished. She and Camille are still in touch. Now Camille and her children and husband visit her regularly, like a summer house. They even helped her renovate her house. Not a palace, as Emily once dreamed, but not bad either. And with the money that Camille received from Christopher, she was able to open a small photo studio. Now, even a famous and in-demand photographer at different celebrations, birthday, anniversaries, graduations, weddings. Especially Camille likes to shoot weddings. And when the guests shout, "Young people bitter," she, no, and whispers, "Happiness to you the most real."